Welcome to the Microgreens Mastery Podcast. I'm your host, Jonah Krochmalnek. Together, we'll explore the art of turning tiny seeds into a thriving microgreens empire, sharing insights, coveted secrets, and strategic wisdom from building one of Canada's largest microgreens farms. Stay tuned for thought-provoking conversations with leading figures in the world of microgreens. Welcome to the podcast, everyone. On today's episode, we have Jeffrey Orkin from Greener Roots Farm in Nashville, Tennessee. This episode is packed full of wisdom from Jeff's 9-year farming career running Greener Roots. We'll be talking about how he runs his farm almost completely remotely, the benefits of automating your microgreens farm, utilizing volunteers in the startup phase of your farm, and so much more. So let's get right into it. Hey, Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, man.
It's great to have you on. I'm really excited to have this conversation and hear more about Greener Roots. But I'd love to start off on kind of how you got into microgreens and farming and how Greener Roots came to become a farm.
Sure. So my background is actually landscape architecture. Moved to Nashville in 2007, had sort of my dream landscape architecture job, living my best sustainability life, walking to work and doing all the things. Lived in downtown, was growing food in my windows just from sustainability has always been a big part of my life. So trying to figure out how to grow food indoors introduced me to hydroponics. And so that was sort of my very first. The economy tanked and I got laid off. And so ended up starting a landscape design build company, which sort of heightened my construction and problem solving skills. And somewhere in there, I decided to start expanding the idea of growing food indoors. So I went from my windows to a little closet in my condo to the rooftop of the condo. And around April of 2014, had done enough R&D. I made enough mistakes to feel as though I had a system figured out that I wanted to build on a larger scale. So not too dissimilar to your story. I took a very terrifying leap and rented a 6,000 square foot warehouse, which felt bigger than life at the time. And my wife and I started building racks and installing lights and doing the whole thing. So we started growing shortly after that. And I would say that literally every year since then, we've had to expand. Now we operate a 10,000 square foot all glass greenhouse in addition to our 6,000 square foot indoor farm. Those are at 2 different locations. Specific to microgreens, so when I first got into the industry, there was a guy in Nashville who had a small microgreen business. Again, some of the overlap in our stories is kind of crazy, but he was growing living microgreen squares on rock wool, basically. And he introduced me to so many of my initial chefs. And so for the longest time, I sort of refused to grow microgreens because he was the microgreen guy. And I just didn't want to compete with him. There's always been a few things in our product mix that may get considered a microgreen that he was not growing, like pea shoots and sunflower sprouts and things like that, depending on what your definition of a microgreen is. But then with time, we started to have people asking for cut microgreens, and he wouldn't sell cut microgreens. He was growing in the basement of his house, and just his system was not set up for it. There was a lot of sort of regulatory concern he had with cutting them. And so as people asked, we started growing specific cut microgreens. And then as our market expanded, one of our target markets was Atlanta, and there was quite a request for a rainbow mix in Atlanta. So we started working on that for a specific customer. And at this point, the microgreen guy I'm talking about has sold his business to one of his employees, and our scale is much, much larger. So it just, we just have sort of slowly introduced micros, and I think over the last 2 years have really ramped up the production.
Awesome. Yeah, I've seen on your guys' social media how automated your system has gone with the microgreens, which is very impressive. But it's cool that you started with was it mostly like lettuce that you started with in
Yeah,
the indoor part?
I would say still by volume, we sell more lettuce than anything. So, I think in total we distribute about 30 tons of lettuce a year.
Wow.
The greenhouse is 100% lettuce. We have a couple of different like clamshell mixed lettuce products that sell exceptionally well in our market. So that's still sort of what we're known for. In fact, we may talk about this more later, but we are introducing our first retail microgreen product in a couple of weeks.
Awesome.
To date, we haven't put microgreens in grocery stores. There's also been, like we've had the usual suspects sort of taken over that market in our area. So like Aero Farms product historically has gotten shipped down to us. 80 acres is shipping in our area. So it's just, sometimes there's things I just don't want to mess with and focus on what we have been. But at this point, I feel like we've largely dialed in the products that we can achieve in the microgreen world. And we're going to start seeing how the retail stuff works for us.
Is 100% of your product right now sold to restaurants for the microgreen side of the business?
For microgreens, yes. Right now, 100% of it is either restaurants or distributors. So we're like 30% grocery, somewhere around 16% goes to distributors. So other people that are distributing to restaurants. And then we're sort of the remainder, 50-something% is restaurants.
Awesome.
Yeah, and we've, one of the things we've been focusing on is trying to grow that distributor market, because they'll take, it's like bring us 400 ounces of microgreens, instead of like, here's your 8-ounce clamshell. It's like, we want 50 8-ounce clamshells. I'm like, all right, let's do that.
Yeah.
And obviously the pricing's a little different, but there's a lot of flexibility in the microgreen pricing. So sure, I'd love to sell everything at $3 an ounce, but that's not always going to work. And if I can sell 50 of them for a little bit cheaper to one delivery spot, then I'm going to do that.
Yeah. Often what I've seen is the economics with scale can work out very well, taking microgreens through the just distributor route.
Yeah.
And like you said, most people want to sell at the highest price point. But you only have to deliver to one spot rather than deliver to, let's say, 30 restaurants. As an example, you can deliver the same volume to one spot. So how much time does that save in collecting payments and invoicing and all the other logistics of delivering? So it's great at scale, but it's quite difficult when you're starting out because the volumes tend to be quite large, and that can make it difficult to, when I was growing in my parents' spare bedroom, if I went to a distributor and they were like, okay, in 2 weeks, can you give us 200 clamshells of micro basil? I would have been like, no, I can't. So you really have to pick and choose your customers based on your size and also the workload that you want to do. So restaurants can sometimes be a bit more work on a daily basis than a distributor. And then a direct to consumer could be more work than selling to a retail store because you have more day-to-day interactions and then all the logistics beyond that. So how many restaurants do you sell to on a given week?
We personally deliver to probably about 30 or 40 restaurants, but then if you tack on the distributors and then the Atlanta market as well, like we probably land in close to 100 different kitchens a week.
Wow, that's incredible.
Some of them I don't even know about, like when it goes to a distributor.
Yeah.
The two distributors we work with in Atlanta, like the hub that is in Atlanta is huge. we have product that's going to Athens, and we have product going into Alabama, and like, places that I would have never thought that it would end up.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's really cool. Yeah, that's yeah, it's nice when you can work with those distributors and then you'll like go travel somewhere and see your product in a store that or in a restaurant that you didn't know it was there. It's
Yeah.
kind of like a nice benefit of using distributors is all that legwork is taken out. They do that sales legwork for you.
Well, and what we had a very exciting phone call yesterday from one of the largest distributors in Nashville. And I don't know if it's similar for y'all or not, but a lot of people are sourcing from an unnamed, I should say, grower in California,
Yeah.
who's a big grower. And the distributor called us yesterday and said, "Hey, we're going to swap over to all your stuff because of like shelf life and quality and things, that." So they're cutting out their California grower just to use our microgreens, which is it's a lot of gratitude to like see systems working to deliver a product that, everyone's realizing is better at times than the alternative.
For sure. And having those systems in place when you get that call is a lot less stressful than like doing everything, for example, filling trays manually, seating manually,
Oh, yeah.
washing trays manually. If you have all those things automated, it's much less stressful and much more exciting to get a call like that because you're like, okay, we can handle it.
Totally.
It's still going to be a lot, but we can handle it.
Yeah.
And that's where having proper SOPs and automation, which we'll get to later on, what you guys have done at Greener Roots with that, is it makes life a lot easier and more
Totally.
exciting to expand the business for sure. So in terms of the microgreen side of your business, have you noticed any in the restaurant scene any preferences for specific varieties that have changed over the last few years you've been doing microgreens, or ones that have really stood out as these are like the top most popular microgreens for food service?
So I would say that since microgreens are not the only thing we grow, we've tried to minimize the variety we have. So we only grow a handful of things, and then all of those things get used to make our rainbow mix, which is like the most popular thing. I think, and you and I've talked about this before, like a lot of restaurants want basil. I just won't grow it. Like we're just not set up to grow it. And then people don't understand that you can't store basil at 30 degrees. It needs to be at 52 degrees. And like my truck's not set up for that. My walk-in cooler's not set up for that. So it's like, micro basil, we get a lot of requests for. Red vein sorrel, we do grow, but it's like the bane of my existence most of the time. Like sometimes it's doing great, sometimes it's terrible. But then, like I could probably name on one hand, it's, we do a mild mix, a spicy mix, we do radishes, we do micro chervil, we do a beet chard mix, which also falls into the bane of my existence, but it's sort of like it is the rainbow in our rainbow mix. So we have to figure out how to make it work. And we'll sell some of those components individually. So we sell a spicy mix. I could sell a mild mix, but no one ever wants it. So like I grow the mild mix, but it's really just like one of the components in our rainbow mix. Mm-hmm. Similarly, like I could never been able to sell micro chervil, but we grow full grown chervil plants and people want it all the time, So there's like weird stuff like that where it's like people ask for chervil. We're like, hey, can we send you micro? And then we send it and they're like, this is not what we need. But in the rainbow mix, it adds an awesome little flavor profile. But we don't, it's like, I know a ton of people grow just arugula or just broccoli. We just haven't, like a lot of times what we grow is driven by what chefs ask us for, and no one has ever asked for that. I also find like Nashville is a pretty strong food market. Like we have some, I should say, like big name chefs, big restaurants, very fancy. And I do think that like to some chefs, microgreens are very like early 2000s. It's like some chefs are not into using microgreens. And so, like our market may not be as large as some other places just based on like where the culinary world is in Nashville. Granted, like all the hotel restaurants and things like that like tend to want their microgreens. So but yeah, I mean, I think I don't even remember what the question was at this point, but like largely like we grow things that people have asked for, and there's a lot of things we're not growing that other microgreen growers are growing just because I don't have a sales channel for them.
Yeah, for sure. I think almost every grower I've seen that gets to a larger scale ends up picking and choosing varieties that are most popular, that are easiest to grow, that that are the most profitable. So there's a balancing act between those three kind of categories of what makes sense to grow. And but just going back to the beginning of the question with basil, basil needs such warm temperatures to grow that forget about the shelf life. Even just trying to grow lettuce, which generally requires about 70 Fahrenheit, and then basil, which is much better at 80 or above, they kind of conflict. And if lettuce is, the majority of your business still, it makes sense to focus on the lettuce, not the basil.
Well, and funny enough, we grow full grown basil just fine. It's just the micro basil was always a headache.
Yeah. Seed density makes a big difference too. What temperature is your indoor facility running at?
So, we have some limitations because the only way we are set up to dehumidify is by using heat. And so there are times when it is dehumidifying, it's dumping a ton of heat in there and it'll get up to 80 something. But if the humidity is not high and it's just in cooling, we're probably around 74 to 76.
Okay.
But yeah, we're not hitting middle to high 80s very often.
Yeah, for sure. And do you have any germination issues with the lettuce in those temperatures, or do you have a separate area for germination?
No, we don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Okay, that's great to hear. So I'd love to hear what your average week is as a business owner of a farm. I think it's it's interesting to hear what people's weeks actually look like on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, and how that differs from the audience listening that is either just starting a farm or running a farm. And I feel like there's a lot of insight for the audience and kind of what your average week looks like.
Yeah, and I think just for context, like I can't do the math. Let me use a calculator. We are entering year 9. So what it looks like now is far different. You and I were talking a little bit at the beginning, but my family actually relocated to Atlanta, Georgia in January of this year. And my farm is still very much located in Nashville. So my average week is a little bit different. I'm sort of a systems maven. I love process. You talk about SOPs, like we have lots and lots of stuff that is documented. I can watch my truck drive around town because we have a routing software. I can see where my team is in the process because we use Asana for checking off tasks. I can see communication from chefs because we have one like online based communication platform. So, the majority of what I'm doing at this point is like communicating with the teams we use Microsoft Teams as our communications tool. I'll see orders come in. I can help with inputting and editing orders. I can communicate with chefs as those messages come through. I do a lot. I have a check depositor sitting on my desk right next to me. So I do all the like banking, ordering packages and seeds and all the things. Transparently, I don't get to farm very much anymore. I do have about 3,000 square feet of soil gardening in my backyard. So like that's sort of my nod to being a farmer. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of just like being sure the business is functioning and paying bills and payroll and benefits and all that kind of stuff is what I get to do.
So you're a remote farm owner,
That's
which
right.
is this is
Yeah.
the first time I've heard of that. It's a really cool concept,
Yeah.
but
It,
I'm sure there are lots of benefits, but also lots of challenges with
totally.
that, given that you're far away. So how long, like if there's something that pops up, I'm guessing there are times you have to go to Nashville.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I still go. And we actually we drive a truck from Nashville to Atlanta once a week. So like I see my truck every Wednesday, get a stack of checks and mail and any product that exists for my family. But yeah, so I somewhat routinely go to Nashville. It's about a 4 hour drive. I just because we do this, the Atlanta trip is a down and back in one day on the truck. So I personally did that for the first like 6 months, 8 months that we did it. So I got really used to waking up at 2 in the morning, hopping in the truck, driving to Atlanta and back. So now similarly, like when I go home, I'll wake up at like 2:33. We're an hour ahead so I can get there before the crew even shows up for work. Spend a full day, hang out at a friend's house that night, get some stuff knocked out the next morning, and head back. And it's actually quite productive. I'm heading there next week to do that exact thing. So yeah,
that's really cool. Yeah, like the distance can be a challenge, but I'm glad you found uh, a system that works better for you, because I've been there where I've done the deliveries for the business, and you're waking up sometimes at 3-4 o'clock in the morning to get
yeah,
it to distributors that need it at 6 a.m. because they got to go deliver it to wherever it needs to go, and it can be it can really uplift your day to
yeah.
day when you have to do that.
Well, and the reason I started this like line of questioning with the context of we're 9 years in is the first. That's not what my life looked like at the beginning. Like I was the delivery driver for 3.5 years. Like I was physically doing tons of work. I actually owned and operated another business on top of the farm at the for the first 2 years. I still was an owner in a landscape design build company. So I mean, I was working all day and coming farming at night, and just a different life stage now. Like I have two kids, and it's just a different world.
Yeah, no, I can totally relate to that on the early years. Like I was so fixated on like just making this farm work and growing the best quality product and making sure all customers are happy and expanding the business. And I think it comes down to where you're at in your different life stage and what you can commit to your business versus everything else that life
Yeah,
has to offer.
totally,
So yeah,
totally.
that's awesome to hear. On the microgreen side, I find a lot of growers do something very unique or very different from other growers, whether it's production technique or equipment. So I'd love to hear something that is different than you've seen other microgreen growers do, and then why you kind of did it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and again, you and I have very kindred trains of thought on a lot of this stuff. But one of the things that's been a challenge for me is like lack of access to automation at a price point that makes sense for small scale growers. So again, it's just funny to me how similar some of our things are. But I worked with the owner of Farmer's Friend to make um, a ours was a slide mount, so it's a track that mounts on the side of a table that the greens harvester, you move the greens harvester instead of moving the tray.
Oh,
And so we like custom designed that with him, and used it. And then shortly after that, he came out with the like table mount that a lot of people have used. Um, and similarly from there, like I really wanted a tray filler, and everything is too big and too expensive. And I finally found this manufacturer in Georgia. I was like literally in the process of designing a machine, and his was basically the same thing I was designing, but he didn't have a tray filler set up for it yet. So we like prototyped a tray filler adapter for this soil machine, and like got that at a great deal. The only thing I was not ever able to really find was a tray cleaner that's small enough. And so we designed and fabricated a tray cleaner that we probably will sell to people if they want to buy it. I think the challenge is like people, for small farmers, like almost every piece of equipment I have purchased or built is more than $5,000, less than $15,000. Like that's sort of the sweet spot. And I've talked to other farmers that want to look at it purely from an economic standpoint. But I think that what you're missing there is just like quality of work. And so, sure, I could pay someone X number of dollars an hour to fill soil trays all day long, but that job sucks. But if you have a machine that costs you $7,000 or $8,000, like don't do the economics on it. Like if you can get $7,000 or $8,000 to buy a machine that fills your trays with soil, do that. And then people enjoy doing the job. It's like, oh, this is fun to like run this. It's so fast. And like, it's like anytime I'm in town, I like want to run the machines just because it's like more fun to do. And then similar, we ended up taking it's a TerraTech field greens harvester. So it's like a hedge trimmer blade with a conveyor. And we bought a conveyor and fabricated brackets to mount those two things together. So instead of using the quick cut greens harvester, we use that now, mostly because it can process more volume more quickly. So you can run 2 trays through it at a time, and then it's dumping into bins instead of being caught by that little fabric backer thing. So it's just like you can get a lot more volume in it before you have to dump and move and stuff. So I think to answer your question, like we take automation very seriously, and trying to figure out like the most economical way to accomplish that. Because I have sort of a design build background, I've been able to morph that into like coming up with designs for machines and things like that. And then, being able to connect the dots on fabricators and stuff like that has been super, super helpful.
That's amazing. The having all those different types of equipment, I think people often think about it just from the economics, and from just the economics, depending on your scale, it can still be a huge benefit from just a financial perspective. But then there's also the perspective people don't think about, which also has a financial impact, is what is the work like for the staff. So if people are washing trays by hand, which luckily before I started hiring staff, I already got that custom built tray washer in place because I knew how terrible it was to wash trays by hand. And any microgreen grower that's done it, once you get 50 plus trays a week, it's probably the one task that people really don't want to do and procrastinate about it. And having a tray filling or a tray washing machine just makes life so much easier. So you also got to think about employee retention when you have this type of equipment, because if you're giving someone a job that's, especially if they're educated and have a lot of skills they want to offer to the business, but you're spending their time and energy filling flats or washing trays by hand, they're probably not going to stay around very long. And then what's the cost of that? And that cost is generally, it's a lot higher than the few $1,000s you'll save by not having a machine.
I also think that there's a quality control thing, and especially like employees are going to turn over. So like if you're trying to train someone how to do it by hand a certain way versus just saying put it into the machine and you know what the machine does, it's easier to train process when you have more automation. So
for sure, that's a great point. Like washing trays, someone does it by hand, you teach them how to do it, and then the next person teaches them, and it's like a broken telephone where you end up coming back to the farm one day and be like, these trays are not properly washed. So you have something that it makes life simpler. I find at our farm, a lot of people would just like, while they're washing trays with the machine, they would just be watching TV shows or listening to music. And there was one staff member that found out a way to raise up with skids raise up like the floor high enough so that he could put a chair down and sit there with a stand watching his movies while putting the trays through. So it just, if you're doing it manually, the quality of life for the staff is just not as good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So in terms of pest and disease control, now you could talk about lettuce and or microgreens, how you kind of manage that, because I've grown hydroponic lettuce and basil and stuff, and Pythium and dampening off tend to spread very fast when they do occur. And then very similar in microgreens, if you don't have proper disinfecting protocols, it can be quite difficult to manage outbreaks of disease or pests. So I'd love to hear kind of your guys' protocol and how you've found solutions when you have had outbreaks of different disease or pests.
I mean, our sort of primary IPM strategy is exclusion. So, I think developing a culture of cleanliness is important, and having good sanitation procedures in place, which embarrassingly took us too long. For the longest time, we were just using bleach to sanitize, and come to find out that's not super effective and half-life, and like there's a much better products out there, much better systems, and then being sure that they're being followed correctly is pretty important from like a disease perspective. So like the cleaning and sanitation side has been critical for us. Our farm is sort of a farm with inside of a building. So from an exclusion standpoint, like you enter the building and there's step mats and air curtains, and you have to wash your hands and, suit up before you walk into where the plants are. So just, a lot of policies around cleanliness help with excluding pests. I'd say from there, like we do have a beneficials program, but it's largely responsive. So we have someone on staff who has training in insect ID. We have sticky traps all over the place. And so we can scout for problems and then eliminate, if there's an obvious outbreak, getting that crop out of the system as quick as possible is sort of the name of the game. Knock on wood, we haven't had any major issues. And almost all of the issues we've had can be tied back to like issues in procedure. So like poor sanitation, or, leaving the door open when you shouldn't, or, just something that could cause issues.
Yeah.
But we've been really, really lucky to not have a lot of pest issues.
That's awesome. Having all those practices to exclude is definitely the number one way to prevent anything from coming in. I found with on the microgreen side that at certain points it'll get introduced in seed or soil, and what I've seen is there's no real way to avoid it. So for most small growers, there'll be a point where everything will be going smoothly. You're just starting out. There's no disease, and you're like, "Oh, I don't need to wash the trays. I don't need to disinfect them or clean out the system every X amount of months." And then it happens, and then you realize, "Oh, it's definitely important to have that." It's only generally after the fact people really recognize how important it is, because if you haven't experienced it or you haven't worked at a farm that has experienced it, you don't recognize how bad it can really get if it's especially being in a controlled environment where insects wouldn't naturally be able to get into the farm, to like ladybugs to eat aphids as an example. So there's no natural ecosystem there to keep things in check.
Yeah, we've actually, it's funny you say aphids. We've never had an aphid issue. Thrips are the thing that occur to us most often. And fortunately, there's some good mites for that. And then there's a biological spray called No Fly that's really good for thrips. And all the fungus gnats and things like that exist, and we can knock them down with No Fly. But generally speaking, we just, unless it's really bad and like decimating crops. The other thing, you're turning stuff so quickly that like it's just never created large scale issues for us.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I've seen. I guess it being as far south as you are in the greenhouse side of the business, you still have a good amount of daylight in the winter to manage I guess the pet. I find in the winter months in our climate, anything that's grown in a greenhouse is much more prone to getting aphids, powdery mildew. There's just not enough daylight
Yeah.
to power the plant. So there's some people that obviously use LED lighting that helps, but it's still not going to replicate what you have in the summer
Yeah.
when there's
We
longer
do
days.
have the greenhouse is lit as well. So
Oh,
like we
nice.
do have lighting. But then we have, we have water chillers and, we've dealt with powdery mildew and all that. And it's just, it really is about climate management at that point, which is, um, it's not, it's not just a set it and forget it kind of thing. It's one of the hardest things to train for.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing is I can remote into all of my computers from where I am and adjust settings and stuff on the climate, which is cool.
Yeah. Having all that technology there probably has allowed you to move to Atlanta, because without that, half of your job that you're doing now, you wouldn't be able to
Yeah.
do it, because, or if you did, you'd have to have a second person there telling you what all the data is, and then you reporting back to them. So you're having like a one staff member
Yeah.
that's literally just for communication. So it makes your life a lot easier and actually doable to um, to manage the farm remotely, which is really cool. You talked about earlier about this distributor that was interested in switching from the farm out in California that grows microgreens as a large scale farm to your guys' product locally. So how is that, like, how is your production space managed right now? How much space do you have to expand? And do you have any plans to expand the farm by footprint or customer base moving in to the next year or so?
Yeah, so we did sort of a large scale microgreen expansion last year, and the system is not, it's fully lit, but it's not filled up. So like irrigation setup, airflow's there. So we like sort of pre-buffered against future sales on that. So we have let's see, that is a 7. We have 14 4x8 trays on one of our systems. Almost everything we do is 13 feet tall. So we're doing, the 4x8 Botanicare trays. It's just a simple way for growing microgreens. Our lettuce is done differently, but
Yeah.
it makes those trays easy to pull out and clean and sanitize and all that stuff. But so we have, of those 14 trays, I think we're growing in about maybe 8 of them, and the rest of them are turned off right now. So, that's, each of those holds 16, 10, 20 trays. It's a bit of expansion that exists already. We are going to be doing an expansion in the spring. It's primarily geared towards lettuce, but there's the way our systems are built, we have a little bit of flexibility to make certain levels lettuce and certain levels microgreens. So there may be a couple rows there that end up trays instead of raft system. So
That's cool. That's great. When I was setting up Living Earth, the reason that some of the spacing is much higher than what you would expect from a solely microgreens farm is we were looking at doing lettuce and full size basil, which we did, but the scale we needed to get it to be profitable, being in the location we are in the city itself, you need a lot of space. So it's nice to have the flexibility of being able to switch between the two, because as demand changes, if you can switch it, that makes life a lot easier, because instead of having to expand into more square footage, you can just adapt production space for what is in demand, and that might even change seasonally.
Yeah. Well, and I think also we're a little unique because we are growing diverse crops. But it makes the automation easier. Like I still get confused by the number of growers that are hand watering on the little like 4 shelf trays. Like I get it, we've grown that way too, but it's hard to automate. It's hard to manage water. And I was listening to your podcast a little bit. I typically say we're growing our stuff hydroponically. I know like it is in a soilless media. so we're using Pro Mix. So I don't know if that's considered hydroponic or not, but it's automated, and the irrigation water is the same water that we're using for our lettuce. And so like we are irrigating automatically into, trays that have a soilless media. I've always said they were grown hydroponically, so I don't I don't know if they are or if they aren't.
Yeah, it's a good question because it's not technically outdoor soil. Promix is a peat moss type of soil.
Yeah.
For me, I think it comes down to the nutrition. So, for example, our farm was certified organic,
Yeah.
but we put the nutrition in the soil, so it's not external being put in. It's put
Yeah.
in when it's planted, and it's all for us. We were certified organic, so we were limited in what we can use, and
Yeah.
what that was a bunch of organic inputs that go into the soil that create a symbiosis, and the bacteria break down the nutrition. So
Yeah.
like that could kind of differentiate it. But I get what you're saying, because it's technically a soilless media. It's not like it's not clay or compost or that sort of thing. Even though our compost is often used in as an additive for microgreens farms.
Yeah.
Which is a hit or miss sort of thing. I can talk about that and for a whole hour on that on its own.
Yeah.
But that's awesome that you have the production space. And yeah, the in terms of small farms, I think one of the biggest reasons I've seen through the consulting work I've done, the small farms may not survive is the burnout. So if you're a single operator owner, like we both were at one point, and we went the route of just doing everything manually, that might cause a significant amount of burnout. And then you're like, I can't handle any more business. And then it kind of just stops there, and you can continue. And some people continue like that for an extended period of time, but it becomes less and less sustainable as each year goes by, that you don't have these relatively easy to implement automation tasks in place. Will mean that you'll be spending more time working in the business than trying to build it, focusing on sales, hiring staff.
Yeah.
You kind of get stuck in that loop of doing the actual day-to-day farming work.
I know you and I were talking about work-life balance a little bit, but like people are always shocked. We don't look at our farm on the weekends. So it goes from Friday at 2 when everyone's done until Monday morning. Like everything's automatic. Like if it needs to water, it's watering. If, fans are on, lights are on, all the things are happening. Shit happens sometimes, and you come in on a Monday morning and there's a flood, and, like things can go wrong. But generally speaking, like, we hand water like at the germ stage. I tried to figure out a way to do something similar to what you and I talked about with the misting thing, but it's just hard because like, you fill the trays, you lay them out, you're seeding, and then you have to move them again to do the watering, and then move them again to do the stacking, and like trying to minimize the touches.
Yeah.
And so, like that's a process that we're still trying to figure out, is like, how do we standardize irrigation so that everyone's watering the same amount?
Yeah.
How much is that each crop needs? And then, when there's issues, like, is it watering? Is it sanitation? Is it soil?
Well, let's get into the work-life balance, because I think that's something that most people struggle with in the early years. So I'd love to hear how you got to the point you're at now in terms of work-life balance, and how the early years looked, and then how you were able to move it towards having a much healthier work-life balance and working on your farm 24/7 pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, investing in people is a big one. We did start the farm with some volunteers, and, I was just very honest about like, here's what we're doing. I don't have money to pay you right now, but if you want to come help and learn with me, you can. And then that particular person did turn into a full-time employee. And, it was hard, transparently, like I couldn't pay people as much as I would have wanted. The business, what I should have said when you asked me what's something unique that we do, we're cash funded. So like I don't have investors. I don't have a bank loan. And that's just like a personal philosophy on business for me, is that like sustainability to me is also just like economic sustainability. And I feel like ultimately one of our reasons for success is that when you look at the Aero Farms and Caleras and all the, bankruptcies tied to financing. So
Yeah,
bankruptcy is a debt response. And so like, there's some people that have worked for me over the years that work for free to nothing. And I'm not saying that I'm like proud of that, but it is how I was able to achieve some semblance of a work-life balance. And to me, it was not like exploitive. It was more like finding people who were excited about what we were doing and wanted to work to help grow the business. At this point, I would say that my staff is definitely paid better, but I still wish I could pay people more. We focus on, so from a work-life balance perspective, like I have 7.5 employees. I pay everyone's salary. I just don't want to deal with hours. We offer healthcare. We have 401k that's matching. We do something called Wellness Wednesdays, where every single Wednesday, once a month, you're off on a Wednesday. So every third Wednesday of the month is your wellness day, Jonah, and you don't have to come to work. And it's just like how we have our like processes set up is like, I can't pay you as much as I want to pay you. And I often tell people this when I'm interviewing is like, look, you could probably go make money more than I can pay you somewhere else. But you get into agriculture because of the work and the passion and the culture. And so, I think full circle, the answer is people. Like you need to have staff. You can't do it all yourself. And the challenge is just, what's your economic model for that? And if you're trying to cash flow the business, there's a world in which you just have to find people that are passionate about wanting to work with you or work for you in your business. And we'll do it at a rate that your business can afford.
for sure. Yeah, no, I think you put that beautifully. It's one of the challenges that people don't often see about farms is how difficult it is to afford to pay staff what they really should be paid. It's a big challenge even in microgreens farming, which is much more profitable than outdoor farming, because outdoor farming, you can often, the owner itself can't even make a basic living off of, which is very unfortunate, and I hope that changes over time. But like the volunteers, I think is something that there's a lot of controversy over, but I'm definitely after. So I just to give a quick backstory. And I'm going to do a whole other episode on volunteer programs because I think it's a really important topic that's misunderstood in the space is to start a volunteer program, because I thought, it's like I'm going to be exploiting people. I'm going to be, using their labor for free and they're not going to be getting paid. And then my partner kind of gave me a good mindset shift because she worked at the university doing a hackathon, and she was able to recruit a lot of volunteers, and there were so many benefits I didn't see to having a volunteer program. So some of them that people may not think of is like, these people they want to come see your farm. They want to help contribute. They're not like, you're not putting shackles on them and making them stay. You give them flexibility. We gave them greens at the end of every harvest, like sometimes like pounds upon pounds of greens that a single volunteer would get, so that we tried to make it so there was a lot more benefit for the volunteers than just the kind of labor help we're getting. I think there's a lot of in the space, people like frown upon like having volunteers, and I think it's not an accurate picture of what is actually happening. And it's possible that a volunteer can be exploited, but I think most people, that like 99% of people don't want to do that. They want to have a fair value exchange between volunteers, and that can be education, that can be product. There's many different ways to do that. I think it's really important to understand that.
We've had a few interns as well that like through a program, like through Vanderbilt University, they have a specific program, and those are awesome for like tackling specific projects like food safety certification or SOPs, or like, things that are hard to to find time to do when you're trying to just grow and sell product. But yeah, I don't disagree with what you're saying.
Yeah, it's different seeing it from the outside and having one person that had a bad experience, which luckily we've never had at our farm, but just from other farms I've heard some not great stories. This is more associated with woofing, I think,
Yeah.
than anything else, and
Yeah.
it's kind of put a bad taste in people's mouths with volunteering at farms. But I think that the 99% are not like that, and 99% want to give back to the volunteers and kind of have a good value exchange, which I think is really important. So in the last couple of years of kind of more focusing on or adding microgreens to your product lineup and focusing on chefs and restaurants, there's so many unique varieties that exist, and there's hundreds of microgreens varieties. So I'd love to hear if there's any unique or exotic ones that someone's asked for as a chef that you've never heard of, and just it was very interesting variety that excited you.
We did tangerine lace for a while for a client, and it was awesome. And it's one of those that like I am surprised that more people don't want it. So I think that's the one that comes to mind. We did grow fenugreek for a little bit for an Indian restaurant. Those are the two that sort of jump out at me, but we don't grow either one of them anymore. Like to me, right now, the most exotic and annoying thing I grow is red vein sorrel. The more I say it, I may just cut it out of production.
It's honestly, we never grew it commercially, or if we did, it was a very short period of time, but it's by far, in my opinion, the most beautiful microgreen that you can lay your eyes on. It is unbelievably, it's like art. It's like art in a plant.
Sure.
It's so beautiful, but I totally get it. It takes like a month to grow. It's quite inconsistent, and it's kind of expensive to grow too. But it's like just as like a centerpiece on my living room table, I would go for that because it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And then in terms of your personal favorite variety of microgreens, and then how you tend to use it.
I mean, honestly, what I get my hands on the most is the rainbow mix because we grow more of it than anything else. And for me, it's, like it oftentimes just gets mixed into a salad. It's an easy way to like top off a piece of salmon or something like that. But we have a pretty good problem at our farm in that we have more demand than products. So I don't get my hands on microgreens that often because most of them are sold. So
that's good. That's good to have a small amount of waste. That means you got a very dialed in production system. Great.
It's pretty tight right now.
You've run your business for almost a decade now, farming, and the pandemic, which was, I would say about a 2-year period, had a significant impact on a lot of people's businesses, including farms. So I'd love to hear how your business pivoted or evolved from COVID and the effects of it, and how you kind of came through the other side stronger.
Yeah, and I know you talked about this in one of your intro things as well. We were diversified going into it, and so while we lost restaurants, we already had grocery stores, and so that helped to fill the void pretty easily. We also already are set up on a website that allowed us to, within about 5 hours, launch a direct-to-consumer site where people could register, log in, and shop. The one thing we did do during that is we partnered with a ton of other local farms because I already have this website where they can log in and upload produce products. And I could put a little bit of a margin on it just for like access to the service. And so we were distributing, bread, meat, field grown vegetables, all of our stuff. We started with like home pickups, and then we would do deliveries with a delivery fee. And we ran consumer deliveries after the pandemic as well. But there was just a point at which like it made no sense to keep doing it. We were making we were making money, but we were making money because we charged a $10 delivery fee. I was making more money on delivery fees than food, and that just felt a little contrary to our purpose.
Yeah.
So we shut that down. And I don't. Some of it is my personality. Some of it is just like I don't believe we're the right fit for farmers markets. But we don't do like direct to consumer farmers market stuff. Like I don't want to harvest a bunch of product and then stand somewhere for multiple hours and maybe sell it and maybe not sell it. It just, we're fortunate to have access to all these commercial channels. And since day one, we've had a distribution system in place. So like we have the refrigerated truck. Well, we didn't have that in day one. We used to crank our AC and deliver in our cars, but like we're set up to not have to mess with farmers markets at this point.
Yeah. Did you ever go to farmers markets when you started out?
No. I mean, similar to what you're saying, it's like a lot of the farmers markets, you can't just sell out and then leave. They want you to stay there the whole time. And like we didn't have enough product on the front end. Mm-hmm. And then it was just easier to sell it this way. Like I have a walk-in cooler. Even at farmers markets, like you're not pulling from a reefer truck.
Yeah.
You're pulling from a cooler, and there's some like food safety stuff that I just didn't want to mess with.
For sure. Yeah. I think the biggest benefit for farmers markets is, in my opinion, is generally when people are starting out, because it's a great way to interact with your customer base and to find out what they actually want, what they don't want, and to learn a lot. So that's kind of, looking back, I didn't know that's what I was doing, but the advice I'd give to people starting out, if they do want to go to farmers markets, is it is a lot of time commitment. So from an efficiency perspective, it doesn't necessarily always make the most sense. Like if you get into a really good market, then sometimes you can sell like a very large amount, like $1,000, $2,000 of microgreens if it's like a really good market in a relatively larger town or city. But it's not very scalable as you become a bigger farm. So it might have a use case in the early stages, and then as you develop into a larger and larger scale farm, it may have less value and purpose in your business model. But there are also like lots of farms that outdoor farms especially, that will sell at farmers markets, and they just do 7 farmers markets a year, 1 day a week, and then they have a staff that manages them, and they can do pretty well in that environment. But it's a lot of work to sell at farmers markets. So
yeah, and I also, it's not that I don't like, I mean, I like people, but like I work real hard all day to like do all this stuff, and then I kind of just like, I just don't want to go stand and talk to a bunch of people at a farmer's market about what I do, which is bad, but like
it's just, everyone's got a different personality and different way. Like I'm pretty introverted, so I'm kind of the same way, where I need to decompress by spending time alone. So for sales it can be very draining for people that are introverted, which is a good thing in the sense of you can get out of your comfort zone and learn that skill set, but at the same time to know yourself enough that may not work for your business. And running your own business, you get the option to choose what your outlets are going to be. So if you're someone who's really extroverted, farmers markets, you may just love going to farmers markets and talking to people all day, whereas there's other people that want to just focus on production, kind of get more in the weeds, or focus on building the business in other sales channels. So it's nice running your own business, being able to choose how you're going to operate it and what sales paths and all those kind of choices you can make.
My energy is often focused at like systems and efficiencies and process stuff. Like that's, to me, where you make your money, is like very efficient, thoughtful workflow. And so I spend so much energy thinking about that kind of stuff to like then stand at a table and explain what hydroponics is every 10 minutes. I'm like, no, I need need something different.
Yeah, I totally get that. So as running your farm for the last 9 years or so, what would you say is the single most difficult challenge you have overcome in that time period?
I mean, as bad as it sounds, or as good as it sounds, like growth is challenging, because increased demand, it seems exciting, growth seems exciting, but it going from one person to 7 staff members, and sort of getting pushed away from just like the things that I was originally drawn to. Like I become sort of like full-time HR and full-time like fixer of things. So I think what's challenging is just like accepting my new role in my business, and still finding satisfaction from it, which, as you know, is it's tough. It's like you build something that my wife and I talk about this a lot. It's hard for me because I've been there since day one to realize what this is. But like people, you get those calls from people you've never heard from that are like, this is the best lettuce I've ever had. Or you like step back and like, we shot a commercial for Fiverr that's been broadcast all over the world, and like getting messages from people like, hey, I just saw you on my TV at prime time. Like, what's going on? There's tons of really rewarding stuff about growth. But it's challenging. And with growth becomes, requires access to more money. And so then you're chasing grants, or, like my whole thing is the more efficient we can be, the more profit we can make. So that's the more cash that we can have to help finance growth. Again, some of this is my own personal aversion to debt. But like it's challenging when you're staring at more demand than you have supply and realizing that you need $120,000 to capture that demand. And like, where's that money coming from? And like, hitting the pavement, trying to figure that out instead of just growing food and making people happy. So.
Yeah, for sure. The reason I got into it, which sounds like the same reason you got into it, is you just love growing food and you
Yeah.
love sharing that experience with people. And it's kind of crazy that you get so good at that you train other people to do it for you, and then
Yeah.
you all of a sudden you have, well, not all of a sudden, but over many years, you've developed a job that you didn't necessarily sign up for when you started, because you have to do it, because you have to learn these skills to run the business so that people can still get this amazing tasting lettuce and microgreens in all the retail stores and restaurants that you guys have available. So it's very funny how that kind of tends to play out. You start just wanting to grow food and it turns into something more.
Yeah. Well, and the flip side is like, if you're a founder and a visionary and an innovator, like you reach a point where it makes no sense for you to be putting soil in trays or seeding trays or harvesting lettuce. Like your brain power needs to be used for something else, for the good of your employees and for the good of the future of the business and all that stuff. And so I think, like it took growing the business to get to that point, but you reach that point and you're like, I should not be delivered. Like I literally was the delivery driver 2 days a week for years. And I finally was like, I have to pay someone to do this. Like I can't keep doing this because I'm not thrilled when I'm doing it. I actually got, I was so fast at it because I had other work to do. And I had a chef that met me in a different context, and I was introduced as the owner, as Greener Roots. And he goes, "You're the owner? Like, I thought you were just a pissed off delivery driver." Because I would just be like in and out and in and out.
Yeah.
So it's like you just have to realize like when your time is not supposed to be spent doing those things. And like we talked about earlier, like people are important to making this thing happen. And if you can find really good people, do your best to hold on to them.
Yeah, for sure. And then having other staff doing these type of tasks not only frees up your time, frees up your mental capacity to think about the next steps, which I've found in my journey of farming. The more staff, more problems. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, it does free up your headspace to focus on other things that are more important for the business. And the better you're able to create that system with the staff, hopefully the less of those problems will occur and more time you can spend actually building the business and focusing on the things that you actually want to do that are fun. Yeah. So if you could go back in time to when you started your farm and meet the younger Jeff from 2014, what advice would you give him to set him up for success?
Ooh, I think be more willing to accept failure. I think there's some times that I thought I had something figured out and I was fighting against my own ego, and I wouldn't just admit that it was a failure and move on. I've gotten better at that with time, and I still will come up with ideas and I'll build things, and then I'll just be like, nope, doesn't work. Like that's money down the drain. But I think realizing, I think the challenging thing about this industry, if it is an industry, still TBD. It's like I think that everyone's making up their own way. There's no set process. There's no set system to buy. There's too many different options. And so therefore everyone forms their own opinion about how it works best. And I certainly, like you and I have two completely different processes, but there are certain things that are very similar. And it's almost a little bit, I would say, rewarding to like have this conversation. Because one of the other things I would tell myself is like, you have to focus on systems, processes, and automation. The sooner you can do that, the faster you can grow this thing. And it's funny, like, I feel like you came to a very similar conclusion and we didn't know each other until 2 years ago.
Exactly.
But like, again, like our systems are completely different. The crops that we grow, but generally speaking, like we have some very similar automation and process stuff. And I think that like ultimately, you're seeing a lot of farms fail right now. And I think the fact that like you and I have both found profitability sort of highlights how important some of those overlaps are in success long term.
For sure. That's awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of the vertical farms that are failing right now are generally the big scale ones that relied very heavily on financing. So there's not to get too sidetracked, but in the vertical farming space in Europe, after the Ukraine Russia war, energy prices went up like crazy, and a lot of energy in Europe is unfortunately derived from fossil fuels. And so when those prices of natural gas and oil went up, the price of the electricity to run these vertical farms went up significantly, and that on these really large farms, that's the biggest cost. So that was a big factor in Europe that led to the demise of a lot of big farms. And then here, I think it was more kind of like everyone was trying to do the Amazon model of just automating the heck out of it and hiring like really smart, high level C-suite employees that cost a lot of money, and then never actually getting to a point where the farm was profitable, assuming that financing would be available indefinitely at zero or close to zero interest rates. And I think that was the biggest thing, because I think a lot of these farms have good systems, but they're all private. Everyone has their own, like you said, everyone has their own system, and everyone has a proprietary system that they don't want to share. And that was one of the reasons that I got into consulting and then into this podcast, is because I think this information should be available to people. It shouldn't be behind closed doors. And by opening that door, it makes everyone benefit. So, there's kind of two camps in that. And I get both sides, but after doing both sides, I see the benefit of sharing this information with people, because it leads to a much bigger impact on the microgreens space or the vertical farming space than holding the success that I've had or anyone else has had behind closed curtains, and not be able to share that with the world and be able for them to learn from that and replicate it if they choose to.
It's hard. I mean, I'm sort of like on the fence still. Like transparently, my employees have non-disclosures and non-competes. That's more to protect my local success, because there have been multiple other farms come into business and go out of business that were trying to do what we were doing in our market. And it's just hard. It's like there are some sort of like key things that make us successful. I think transparently looking back now, like we're buffered against competition pretty well. Like you got a lot of catching up to do for where we are. but it's still one of those things where like we have other people that like want to come just tour the farm, and usually the answer is no. It's like, look, I don't have, this is a commercial operation, we don't have time to show you and answer a bunch of questions. And who are you and what are you trying to do with this information?
No, I totally understand that side, and I think it's important to find a balance between the two, because there was one time at Living Earth, we had this volunteer that came that was just asking so many detailed questions. And this is the only time it ever happened. They were asking like, what's the seeding rate for basil? And then she like maybe over the course of a few, like so many questions that, and I'm pretty open book, but I got to a point where I was like, okay, something's very weird going on here. But that's few and far between. And the way I kind of think of it is you have to have so much commitment to actually get to the 10-year mark of a business, or even the 5-year mark of running a farm, that most people, unless they're dedicated, wouldn't be able to do that. And if they would, then they're the right person to run a farm. And if those check marks kind of are checked off, then they're still 5 or 10 years behind where you are. So that's the way I kind of have looked at it. But I totally get both sides, because like, you don't want someone working at your farm to go to a competitor and share all the seeding rates and things like that. Like that's definitely something that's important, and intellectual property should remain the intellectual property of your farm. But there's lots of things like just general tips and guidelines that can be shared that are generally not shared, or if they are, often the information on YouTube is someone that's been doing it for 6 months and wants to be a YouTuber, rather than actually running a farm and then sharing the success from that farm after having built a profitable, scalable business. Well, this has been really awesome. I think there's a lot of great insights here in this conversation, so I'm excited to get this out to the audience. But if people want to connect with you or learn more about Greener Roots, where can they find you online and on social media?
greenerroots.com, and Instagram is the only social media I really use, but it's greener_roots, or you can just search for Greener Roots. I don't think you'll find anyone else.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll put it in the show notes so that if people are interested in checking you guys out, they can definitely see. There's lots of great videos on their Instagram on the automation that they have, just to get the visual of what automations can look like. So thanks so much for coming on, Jeff. It was great to have this chat with you.
Awesome. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks for tuning in to the Microgreens Mastery Podcast. To access a wealth of insights, just click the subscribe button, stay notified about each new episode, and enjoy all of this wisdom for free. If you're ready to supercharge your microgreens business, visit microgreensconsulting.com for a gold mine of guides and resources. We've transformed thousands of microgreens businesses, and you're invited to join the success story. Let's stay connected. Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok at Microgreens Consulting for exclusive content and expert tips and wisdom. If you found this episode insightful, please leave us a review, spread the word, and let's share microgreens magic with the world. Until next time, let curiosity fuel your growth, and may happiness be your harvest. Happy growing, everyone.